Have you ever noticed how most, if not all, DDR players usually face a certain direction? Think of this familiar scenario. You're playing a song, you get a great or a miss. You know you're not going to beat your personal record, but instead of walking off the song entirely, you kind of heel toe the notes, so you kind of hit them just to keep your life bar alive so that you can continue on to the next song without failing out of your set. But when you do that, do you tend to face left? I'm going to do my best to demonstrate on my cab here. So you've kind of given up on the song, right? But you don't want to give up your whole set. So you want to keep yourself alive, hit some notes here and there. But you notice that most players, if not all of them, will face this way. And they will ride the brackets like this. Why not this way? But have you noticed that usually you don't see anyone facing the right? Well, I think I have a guess as to why. I'll do my best to demonstrate on the screen here and I'll show you what I mean. So if you've seen one of my previous videos a little while back, you may remember me talking about how the layout for DDR is asymmetrical. Well, I think the reason why people tend to face to the left when they're bracketing is because of that asymmetrical layout. Now, you might be thinking, what do you mean it's asymmetrical? There's 4 buttons. That's an even number. But let's first take a look at some other rhythm games, how their buttons are laid out and how they translate into the game on the screen. So let's take a look at Beatmania 2DX as the first example. So you got, a turntable and 7 keys here. Notice that they translate pretty much 1-to-1 in the game. So you have the turntable, keys 1 through 7, and then on the screen here, they pretty much, go in the same exact order. Turntable, keys 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The layout in the game is pretty much the same as it is on the controller. If you ever seen pop-in music, it's really simple. It's just 9 buttons across the way, kind of alternating between top and bottom buttons. Let's take a look at DDR. You see the button layout up here. You got, left, down, up, and right. But as you notice on the pad, so you start from left, and then you see down and then up. But on the pad, up and down kind of share the same. Well, they share the same column. So up and down are kind of in the same place. So you have your left and your right where they should be. But if you take a look at down and up, they're in the same column. It's not a 1-to-1 layout like Beatmania or Pop-In Music is, or even Sound Voltex. The layout in Sound Voltex is pretty much translated 1-to-1 on the controller. The buttons are where they should be. The placement of the bottom keys makes sense. The knobs are on the side like they are in the game. Very easy to translate your movements according to what is shown in the game. But in DDR, the up and down, they should be sharing the same spot, but because you can't really put up and down in the same spot in the game, that would be super confusing. You kind of have to split those 2 buttons up. Konami, the makers of the game, decided to split down and up by making it down first and then up second. And, not the other way around, which you notice a lot of beginner players seem to confuse down and up a lot. I know I myself, when I was starting off, getting myself to remember which button was up and down was really difficult. So it's because of these 2 arrows kind of sharing the same spot physically means that it's not a truly symmetrical layout. We want to take a look at Pump It Up. I think Pump It Up's layout is symmetrical and makes more sense than DDR's does. Even though the up left and down left and up right, down right, those 2 share the same space, the same column. The middle button is what keeps the symmetry. When you think about it, Do you notice anyone ever leaning to a certain direction when they're bracketing, when they're playing Pump It Up? Like the layout for Pump It Up is more balanced and even because the middle button kind of acts as an anchor. Now, if we go back to DDR, they don't really have that. Kind of just have to know where down and up is. Now, back to the point of this. So I think the reason that people usually tend to face the left side rather than the right. You notice this jump here. If you were to try to hit that jump as a bracket, as one input, one button, this is all you have to do. You just hit these two arrows with one foot. And I think that translates easily well because these two, they're together. You can kind of read them as one input. If you split the arrow targets like this, left down and up right, this is just splitting everything up between left side and right side. So if I read everything as just left and right, both of these inputs, left and down, I associate it with it being on the left side. Any up right jump is going to be associated with the right side. But you can do the same thing. You can bracket up and left the same way, but you don't really make that connection. It's harder to make that connection because these two inputs are much farther away from each other than this one. So it's not immediately discernible that these two buttons here can be hit together with one foot. We always read it as a jump. This is why bracketing is one of the most difficult techniques to master because you have to train yourself to make that connection, that this can be hit as one input with one input like this rather than two. The same goes for down and right. Down and right has the same problem that up and left does. The two arrows are so far apart from each other that you can't really make the immediate connection that those two can be hit with one foot at the same time. But it's much easier to hit up and right because those two buttons are just right next to each other on the screen. So it's easier to make the mental connection that these two can act as one input, like on the right side. But this is harder because we associate the down arrow here as being a left side button. I got to hit that with the left foot, not the right foot, because it's on the left side of the layout here. But to master bracketing, you kind of have to train your brain to treat the up and down arrows as kind of interchangeable. It's also an important thing to note for crossovers too. So say for example, we have a basic left down right crossover. So left, down, right. Let's say we got to make that sequence. So you got to hit, left, down, right, like that. But the right arrow seems so much further away from left and down. So I used to tend to do for those crossovers, like I'll hit left and down, but I feel like I have to reach so far to the right because mentally I'm reading the right arrow as being so much further away from left and down that I have to extend my leg over to make it. When in reality, if you look at the dance pad, left, down, right, the right arrow is actually much closer than I think it is. You don't really have to move that far to get to the right arrow. So if you eliminate this column entirely, if you eliminate the up arrow column entirely, as much as we would love that, because we hate the up arrow up in here. So just imagine that the right arrow is right next to the down arrow. I imagine that it would be much easier to hit those turns because you don't have to really reach that far. Same for going the other way. But because the right arrow is so far away from the down arrow, mentally I'm doing this when I could just be doing this. So instead of starting so far out here to hit that turn, I don't really have to move that far. It's much closer to you than you think it is. So this is something that I usually keep in mind now to get better at turns, is remembering that when you're turning, when you're crossed over, the button, the panel here, is actually much closer to you, your center of gravity, than you think it is. I usually find myself, when I'm doing that pattern, kind of extending outward when I really should be, more direct with the movement and keeping my leg closer to me. Just like with cross unders, it's, you got that tendency to stretch a little outward because you see the arrow is much further away than it really is. In this case, you got to keep it closer to your other foot. So if you're doing a right, up, left crossover, the third note, it's much closer to your other foot. You don't have to extend that far out. I used to find myself ending up like down here because mentally I'm trying to extend my leg out as far out as I can to hit that arrow. So I just have to mentally get rid of that other column so that the notes, when you're reading them, they're actually translating to what you are doing on the dance pad. So I think that was a little more difficult to explain than I thought it was going to be, but I hope that I managed to get my thought across, and I hope that you all found this sort of helpful. Just something to consider, to think about next time you go play DDR or Step Mania, ITG Mania. So yeah, happy stepping and good luck to everybody that's participating in ITL Online 2024, and I'll see you in the next one.